Hello, everyone. We are starting with our first talk in this session. Please give a warm welcome to Marc Gibbons, who will be speaking about Finding 2.0.
Good morning, thank you. Before I begin, I'd like to recognize Lincoln Loop for making it possible for me to be here and for supporting the development of this talk. So thank you. Do you remember as a child being asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? Did any of you here answer, I want to become a Python developer? Well, maybe some of you did, but chances are others are doing something completely different today. How did we all end up here? Regardless of what you might have answered, the path that led you here today at PyCon US in Pittsburgh was likely filled with twists and turns, and who you are today might be quite different from past versions of yourself. Your interests may have changed. You've likely faced your share of hardships and challenges, and as a result, you've learned, you've grown, you've become wiser. But there might come a time when life feels a bit like a software library that's been neglected. You know the kind, like one that hasn't had a commit in months, maybe years? Maybe you're the maintainer of this library and you're horrified by all the open issues and pull requests. And now you're facing this critical issue and it must be fixed. But the weight of all the hacks and the workarounds and compromises that have added up over time make it next to impossible to solve. And so you've reached this tipping point, and to move forward, you have to make breaking changes. Maybe embark on a rewrite. Maybe it's time for version 2.0. Now, I use the number 2 today because it has this special meaning, right? We hear it in popular culture. New and improved, latest and greatest. It's used to market both products and people, even American presidents. But in our world of software development, have you noticed that actually very few libraries are on version 2 or more? So I was curious about this, so I checked out the Python packaging index, and I discovered that almost 90% of all packages that follow a semantic versioning format are actually below version 2. And I'll share a QR code at the end of the presentation for how I did this. And it's not just like obscure libraries that were pushed to the index and then abandoned. I'm talking about like really popular libraries, like FastAPI, right? 84,000 stars, just got some VC funding, I hear. LangChain, right? Also on version 0. And then those that do reach version 2 end up taking years, if not decades, to get there. NumPy, for example, took over 18 years to release 2.0. Pandas, 13 years. And then there are those that avoid the number 2 altogether, like it's the 13th floor in a building. Famously, Java went from 1.4 to 5. And in Python land, pip and virtual env all just kind of dropped that number on the left and shifted things over, just bypassing 2. So why is that? What is it about the number 2, right? Is it because it tells the world that this is different, that this replaces what came before it, that this is what you've all been waiting for, and therefore this must be perfection? Could that be an explanation to the hesitancy to release 2.0? I don't think it's good enough. What if I fall short? It's not ready, I'm not ready. Is that what we're telling ourselves? I mean, that sounds a lot like imposter syndrome. And if you're not familiar with this term, WebMD defines it like this, quote, imposter syndrome is when you doubt your own skills and successes, you feel you're not as talented or worthy as others believe, and you're scared that one day people will realize that. Now, this lives in our inner world, that's our inner chatter, but could we be getting similar messages from the community? Take Django, for example. I'm a Django dev. It took 12 years to release 2.0. But let me tell you an interesting story. Adrian Holovati, Django's co-creator, suggested releasing 2.0 almost a decade earlier. In 2007, Adrian posted a thread in the Django developers group in which he invites the community to propose must-have features for Django's next big release. And what's interesting in this thread is that Adrian actually suggests skipping version 1 and going straight to 2. He says, quote, "We're really dealing with a 2.0 product. We know Django rocks and is rock solid, and we should give it an appropriate number." He continues, "After having endured a 2.5-year deluge of when is 1.0 coming out, I would find it incredibly satisfying to release this thing and slap a 2.0 on it." And as you can imagine, people had opinions. Some people thought this was a great idea on its own. Others didn't. Someone suggested never naming anything 1.0 or 2.0 because it implies no one has tested it. And my personal favorite was a suggestion to use Django Reinhardt's album titles as a versioning scheme. Example, Django Paris 1945. But there was some pushback. In response to this suggestion, Armin Ronacher, who was the creator of Flask, wrote a blog titled Django's Problems and Why 2.0 is a Bad Idea. And in short, he argues that version numbers mean nothing, skipping a version number is entirely a marketing trick, and Ruby on Rails had recently released 2.0, and he felt there was a gap between Rails and Django. So, and this is 2007, by the way. But here are the messages: not ready, not good enough, not worthy. But who cares? What's a number, right? Today I'm talking about semantic versioning because it's one of the most widely used versioning schemes out there. And if you don't know it by its name, you'll recognize it by the format. There are 3 numbers: a major, a minor, and a patch. And the creator of the spec, Tom Preston-Werner, explained that he was tired of everyone using version numbers in whatever way they wanted and knew we could do better. So he gave each of these numbers a meaning and some rules around when they should change. And so in short, you bump the major version number when you have incompatible API changes, the minor when there's a new feature that's backwards compatible, and finally the patch number for bug fixes. The spec also gives some indication as to where to start. It suggests that if you're in your initial development phase, you should start at 0.1.0, and if your software is in production, you should already be on 1.0.0. And so in his blog, Tom addresses this collective reluctance we have to bump major version numbers. He suggests it's because it's often tied to a marketing scheme, and therefore it's a big deal. And he argues that this is problematic, that, quote, major versions are not sacred. A change in major version indicates a backward incompatible change to the public API. That's it. It's not a marketing scheme. It doesn't have to be revolutionary. It's just a signal of breaking change. So, do you maintain open source libraries? Are you part of the 90% crowd that's below version 2? Or maybe you don't use semantic versioning. Maybe you're using something that's even more popular called zerover, which states that you can't have a major version number greater than 0. This is satire, by the way. It was published on April Fools. Don't use it. But what about you? You as a person. If you were to give yourself a version number as you are here today, what would that be? Give it some thought. And I'll tell you a little bit about my personal changelog. So in a past life, I'll call it my initial development phase, I was a professional musician. I played with symphony orchestras across Canada, and that's me on the right playing with the Montreal Symphony back in 2010. Now, after a few years of freelancing, teaching, and taking auditions across North America, I realized that this wasn't for me. Life as a struggling artist didn't align with goals like maybe starting a family and not being poor. And lucky for me, I knew how to code, and I was reasonably good at it, and I thought maybe I could do this full time. And I did. And for a while, I actually did both. But then I had kids, new responsibilities, and deep down, I just didn't enjoy music. And so in 2015, one night, I was driving back from a gig that was like 3 hours away, and I decided right then and there that this was it. And I haven't touched the oboe since. And so just like that, I deprecated music and I removed it from my life. In semantic terms, that's a backwards incompatible breaking change. Now, fast forward a few years. It's 2019, I'm programming, I'm working remotely, I'm nice and comfortable. There's another kid in the mix. We're living the so-called American dream. Now, this photo was taken at our community's annual Terry Fox run, and I'll explain who that is, because with all this talk of annexation out of Washington, you'll need to know if you'd like to qualify for Canadian healthcare. Terry Fox is a national hero who, in 1980, set to run across Canada to raise money for cancer awareness and research. The catch is that Terry only had one leg, having lost his other to bone cancer. And so after running 3,339 miles, cancer forced him to stop. Terry died less than a year later, at age 22. But his legacy lives on, and the annual run, which takes place all over the world, has raised close to $1 billion for research since then. And so I'm sharing this photo with you today because my life was about to change forever. As I would soon find out, that year I'd been running for me. 10 days later, I was under the knife. I noticed this large lump in my neck, but I didn't think much of it, right? We had kids in daycare, we all had colds at home. But as the cold went away, the swelling stayed, so I had it checked out. Now, you don't typically hear, I have good news, and you have cancer in the same sentence. But that's how the surgeon delivered the pathology to me. He said, you have Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is indicated by these popcorn-like cells. And he delivered it as good news because he suspected it was something worse. He said, you looked really sick when you came in. And so he told me reassuringly, Marc, this is going to suck, but you're probably going to be okay. Probably okay? I mean, all I knew about Hodgkin's at that time came from Curb Your Enthusiasm, and it came from an episode where Larry David questions the cause of death of his friend's father at the funeral. He's like, why is he dead? I thought he had the good Hodgkin's, not the bad Hodgkin's. And if you're familiar with the show, chaos ensues. Now, to be clear, there's no such thing as good Hodgkin's. It's no fun, but it is treatable. I mean, Mario Lemieux of the Pittsburgh Penguins, after winning a Stanley Cup, had Hodgkin's, was cured, and continued, and is one of the best hockey players of all time. So maybe there's hope for that cup for me. So the plan, chemotherapy, radiation, and off I went. But just like in software development, things don't always go according to plan. The frontline treatment didn't really work. So we escalated to something a little more intense. And it too didn't really go as well as expected, and I needed more and more chemo. And now it's March 2020. I don't know if anyone remembers that time a bit. Well, I can tell you COVID was certainly not part of the plan. But thankfully, treatment continued, and by summer 2020, the cancer was dead, and I got to have radiation. Yay. And I eventually got through it. I got to smash this pretty cool gong. I was told, you beat cancer. I wanted to party, throw a fundraiser. But we're in peak pandemic, like OG Wuhan variant, and I had to wait. So instead, I bought a gravel bike. And so on a balmy day of later that year, November 2020, I joined a friend on a 100-mile ride across Toronto and onto the Niagara Escarpment. And it was really incredible, considering where I'd been a few months before. So we're now in 2021. I still wanted to do something. I live in a small town called Port Perry, about an hour outside of Toronto, and our local hospital had launched this fundraising campaign to purchase a CT scanner. And I thought, well, I've had a lot of those, how can I help? So I'm like super into biking now, and I'm always inspired by Terry Fox's story. I thought, what if I could organize a cycling event and make it a fundraiser? And so I pitched the idea to my friend, who's the president of our local Rotary Club. And this event, Port Perry Pedals, was born. We managed to convince 200 people to come out in the pandemic, ride their bikes. We raised $40,000, and we now have this CT scanner at our community hospital. And thank you. And I'm pleased to say I've gotten through it twice already, so it works. So it's a great story, right? Local man beats cancer, does great thing for community. In fact, that's exactly how it was reported. It made front page news. And here's an example from a local magazine. I have this framed at home, and I look at it every day, and I'm really proud of it. And in terms of versioning, you could say this experience led to multiple new releases. Becoming a cancer patient, a survivor, a guy who rides bikes, and apparently an event organizer. That's a lot of new features for my versions. And people might look at this photo and think, wow, like this is someone at their peak. But there's more to this story. Because to me, this looks like someone who's actually at their lowest. In fact, to me, this is what rock bottom looks like. Because I see someone who's suffering. I see someone who, while battling cancer, suffered from another disease, which if left untreated, would lead to the same outcomes as lymphoma. And that disease is called addiction. And things were only getting worse. But for that, I'll rewind just a bit. Shortly after that 100-mile ride I told you about, I started feeling off again. I was just told I was in remission, but I was feeling cancery. So a scan confirmed it, 5 out of 5 for cancer, but the site was too small to biopsy. So the plan was to just get rescanned every 3 months and see if something happened. Now, each of these scans came with what some people call scan anxiety. All the waiting, like getting the actual scan and then worrying about like what are the results going to be. And so consider this Python script, which I call life.py. It's a basic event loop. And my main function was starting to throw some exceptions. And so rather than debugging and problem solving, I just wrapped the whole thing in a broad try except. And whenever an error was raised, I relied on the only coping mechanism I thought I had available at the time, which was alcohol. And at first, that might have looked harmless. Had a hard day at work? Have a beer. Had a good day at work? Also a beer. It's Wednesday, and it's my neighbor's dog's birthday. Let's turn up. The loop kept running for a while, but things eventually took a turn. The program was leaking memory. I just got back from hospital. I'm feeling out of sorts. My wife's really upset, and I don't know why, because I can't remember what I said last night. The CPUs were overheating. The cores were melting down. And so after a year of living on pins and needles with these inconclusive scans, the cancer was back. Stage 4 this time, it went into my spine. This might have been what Larry was talking about with the bad Hodgkin's. And as devastating as this was, you know what the hardest part was? It was feeling like a failure and a fraud. I was telling myself, you never beat cancer. Your fundraiser was a scam. So I would start this new type of chemo called salvage therapy, which really doesn't inspire confidence. And then I would go on to have a stem cell transplant. Now that's a high-risk procedure. You're in hospital for about a month. There's a 5% chance they kill you, and the odds of success are 50-50. And so I'm thinking like, whoa, will this work? What will I do in hospital for a whole month? Like, will I be sick, bored, miserable? What do we tell the kids? Why is this happening? But as the admission date approached, something changed. My thinking began to shift. What if this wasn't a prison sentence, but rather an opportunity? Who gets a whole month off from life, I thought? No work, no responsibility. It's wild to think of a critical illness as a form of vacation, right? And that says something about burnout. But before admission, I declared to my wife, I'm going to leave this place a different person. I'm going to leave here as Marc 2.0. Now, I won't pretend it was simple or easy. I didn't magically leave a transformed person. But what became clear in that moment was that all the hacks, the workarounds, and the compromises that had added up over the years made it impossible to move forward. I had to make breaking changes. I had to embark on a rewrite. And now I'm going to share with you what I did, because I don't think getting cancer or experiencing some other catastrophe is a requirement to bump a major version number. Chemotherapy is not a performance-enhancing drug. So I'll share how I went about it. I went into hospital with an intention. From this moment forward, I would do everything I possibly could to remain cancer-free. Now, I couldn't control what was happening to me, but I could control my response. I could choose to be miserable, and I could choose to suffer. And yes, those are choices. They're optional. Another choice was to use these weeks in isolation and get to work. And so the first thing I did was perform this life assessment, right? Think of it like a code-based audit. What's working? What's not? Where's the technical debt? And so between treatments, labs, the blood transfusion, and all the other fun activities that happen in hospital, I scribbled away. I logged the issues. I wrote it all down. And one of the things that stood out was that work-life balance was way off. I was working too many hours, and for what? I wasn't taking breaks during the day. I didn't look after my body or my mind. And I also realized that working remotely made me feel disconnected and isolated and knew there had to be a better way. And then I looked ahead. What does 2.0 look like? And this is more an exercise that's more in searching for the absence of negatives. Like take a software library, for example. Like a great library will usually be bug-free, but having a bug-free code base won't make a great library. It needs to do something. It needs purpose, and for that, you need vision. And for me, being alive to see my kids grow up was obviously top of list, but really that's a baseline. How would you show up in that situation? I was being given a third, perhaps final chance at life. How would I honor this gift? Recall that a bump in major versions signals backward incompatibility. So by definition, we have to break things. It's something that we must not only accept, but embrace. And yeah, it might be painful, getting sober, changing careers, moving to a new city, leaving a toxic relationship. Your circle of friends might change, your hobbies, maybe your very identity. And that's okay. Discomfort is often followed by growth. And now we need a plan. What gets prioritized? Do we address technical debt first and then move to new features? I mean, that sounds a lot like the kind of work that we do, doesn't it? So it might be useful to divide the project into categories or milestones, and these are the ones I came up with. There are 5: health, family, community, career, and finances. And some categories will be more important at different times. But ideally, we want to seek and achieve balance. And most importantly, set a release date. Commit yourself to it. So these were the ingredients I used to find 2.0. It started with an intention, an assessment, a vision, acceptance, and a plan. And it's doable. I won't pretend I did this alone, though. I need help. Just like clients come to us for our expertise, there are therapists, maybe coaches, who are qualified to do this type of work. There's zero shame in asking for help, and I'd go as far as saying it's a requirement. And since things don't always go according to plan, having someone to help, like an accountability partner, can help you stay on track. You might have to take a detour. You might have to abandon a route completely. But as long as you're moving in the right direction towards that vision, you're making progress. So if you're curious, if this is something that interests you, you might be asking, when's a good time to start? And so the next time you open your Python shell, I invite you to type import this for an answer. Now is better than never. Because if you're stuck in a rut, or you've been holding back an idea, an ambition, a dream, why wait? You don't need permission. There will always be a reason to delay. I'll get started once my house is clean, which for those of you with kids know that will never happen. So don't delay. Life is short. I'd like to end today with a quote from Annie Leonard, who was the executive director of Greenpeace USA. Now, it's a quote about climate change, but I think it applies well here. She says, quote, "Change is coming, change is inevitable. The question isn't if we are going to change, but how. Because we're either going to change by design or by disaster? So what will it be? Design or disaster? This was the path I took. And yeah, there were challenges and setbacks. And I still had a whole year of treatment left after the transplant. And I used that timeline to structure the development and the launch of Marc 2.0. Now, I had two goals today in giving this talk. The first one was to reach somebody here in this audience. Because if you are that person, like the one I showed earlier, who's suffering in silence, you're not alone. There is hope, and there is a better way. My other goal today is to challenge you to leave this conference and bump your major version number. Whether that's for a software library you maintain or for you. The fact that you're here today means you have the skills to do it. And the journey and the steps I shared with you might serve as an inspiration. But don't wait for disaster. Major version numbers are not sacred. But what happens if disaster does strike? We can't control what happens to us, but we can control our response. And what this experience has taught me was that within hardship lies opportunity. And so thank you for the opportunity to be with you here today. I'm Marc Gibbons, and this has been Finding 2.0. Thank you so much. Here's my stuff and the QR code if you're interested on how I got the data from the Python packaging index. I'll leave that there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have a couple of mics within the spaces between the chairs. If you have any questions for Marc, just come up there and ask.
Yeah, hi. This is really emotional for me. In my case, it's not me who's suffering. It's my father-in-law. My mother-in-law passed away from cancer a year and change ago.
I'm sorry.
He's devastated. He's lost his bones. He doesn't eat. He's depressed. He can't do anything. We just it's very hard to see. It's like seeing a whale on a beach, like absolutely powerless because he feels like he needs to die, like his time is gone. But during her disease, the cancer stuff, my wife was pregnant, and she died 4 days after my kid was born. I was wondering if you had any tips, maybe not from you, from your family. How did they help you? Because it's very hard, not just for my father-in-law, but actually like trying to help somebody who doesn't want any help and he just wants to die.
Yeah.
And it's heartbreaking. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for sharing. I would say the role of primary caregiver is probably the most difficult. I think being on the patient side of things, it's almost easier because you feel like you're in control and have some agency. But the challenges and the invisibility of the person who's supporting is real. And so I would suggest, finding support groups and help, because there are many people living through this that can help, and you could share in that. So that would be my advice, because it's an incredible burden. And when you're sick, people ask you how you're doing, but no one's asking my wife, like, hey, how are you doing? How are you keeping family afloat? and making sure the kids are good, all that. So yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you.
Please find Marc right
Happy to
after. And now, yeah, we have a 15-minute break before the next talk. So again, please give Marc a round of applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.